have an issue with that, don't you? Because God has an issue with that. Not putting things before him. Then notice he says not only idolaters, liars shall not be in that New Jerusalem. Well, as we look at this, these verses here, all three of the are talking about the idea of lying. You know, lies are the opposite of God's character. You know, when we lie, we're acting like our old father, the devil. He's the father of all lies. Now again, I'm talking about people who live this lifestyle every single day, and by doing so, they are not only opposing God, they're refusing God's word and God's way, and they're refusing God's salvation. So we look at this and we understand that those things are not going to be there. In verse 8, he says they're going to have their part in the lake of fire. You know, one thing I cannot do is judge whether you're saved or not. Now, you can tell me about, preacher, I'm saved, and I can see in your life that evidence is a sign. I don't know if you're saved or not. So that's why I believe every person ought to always make sure that they've done what God said to do to be saved. Well, preacher, I have done what God said to do to be saved. Then we ought to be living what God told us to live like as a result of being saved. So we find liars. Man, one thing I've noticed in life, you don't have to train a child on how to tell a lie. Now, I look down here in little Elizabeth. She's such a sweetie. I'm sure one day that Brother Miss Box sat her down and said, now, Elizabeth, if you're going to be good at this, we're going to try and help you. Here's how to tell a lie. I can imagine them sitting down with her saying, now, Elizabeth, we don't believe in lying. We don't tell lies because lies are not what we ought to be doing. A child by nature, we by human nature are liars. We don't like to admit that, do we? We don't like to say, well, preacher, I'm not that bad a liar. I didn't say you were a bad one. I just said we all have a tendency to cover our tracks. We all have a tendency to try and cover up, so we tell lies. Do you know that the Bible never gives lie a color? There's no such thing as yellow, black, white, gray. There's no, you know that white lie thing? That's a lie. Because there is no color to lies. Lie is sin, and sin is sin, is it not? So he said these characteristics are not going to be in heaven. Now, when you go up to somebody in the New Jerusalem and you say, hey, good to see you, you'll actually mean it. Hey, how you feeling? I'm feeling great. You'll actually mean it. In heaven, you won't have to worry about going up to somebody and say, hey, how you feeling today? And 30 minutes later, you're still listening to all the aches and the pains and the problems. And no, in heaven, we're not going to have any of this. None of the temptations, none of the defilement that we have in this city. Pure water, pure people, and pure living conditions. He goes on and he tells us here in verse 9 through 10. Verses 9 through 10, he refers back to the first three chapters. And in that, he's telling us about the city that came down. And I won't go into all of it. We talked about it a little bit earlier. But we're talking about here in verse 11, glory that brings kingly splendor. We oftentimes don't understand what kingly splendor means. Now, let me give you a quick illustration. Have you ever seen a king? Maybe it was in movies or maybe it was in real life. But they have this long flowing garment. They have the beautiful purple colors. They have the white fur. They have the jewels and the crown. I mean, and when they are dressed in their finest, wow, it is splendorous to see. The beauty of the garment that they're in. Then they're sitting on this big, beautiful throne, and you just stand there and like, wow, man, that is an awesome sight. It will not be as awesome as when we see our King sitting on the throne, all of his splendor. The city itself is going to be amazing in its beauty as we talk a little bit more about it later on. Do you know what makes the New Jerusalem such a splendorous city? Street of gold. Wow. The walls are of jasper. Y'all know what jasper is? Jasper is like our diamond. But this is such a crystal clear form of jewel that you'll be able to look through it and see. And the sun, you know, the sun that we tan under today. The sun that we enjoy its light and heat, do you know it won't be there? We won't need it for light. For Jesus is the light of that city. Now, interesting. Do you know there will not be one nook or one cranny or one place in the New Jerusalem his light doesn't penetrate? Light will be the same everywhere. Now, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but folks, listen, this gold that's in heaven, this gold is so brilliant and high shining that it appears almost to be transparent. You've got the wall that is a transparent looking wall. You've got the gold that is before the throne and the street of the city, and you look at it, and then the brilliance. Now, let me describe for you. We'll close. Do you remember on the Mount of Transfiguration where the disciples were there, the 3 disciples, and they saw Jesus, and they saw the brilliance of his glow, and they were amazed. Now, that brilliance was a little, probably somewhat veiled, but in the New Jerusalem, it won't be veiled at all. It will be the full, powerful, glorious shining of the sun. And it's going to reflect off that gold. I don't know, we're going to have some new eyes when we get there, because it's going to be the brightest place you've ever seen. If you've ever had cataract surgery, before that, everything was kind of yellowish dim. You have that cataract surgery and they give you these glasses, and don't take those glasses off for a day or so. And then the next day you get up, you take them off, and you walk outside, and it's like, oh my soul, you can't see anything because of the brilliance. I believe our eyes are going to be new eyes that we'll be able to not just see, but we'll behold and be able to not even blink at